Yo, what's up guys? Today I'm going to be talking about what I think is better, controller or keyboard and mouse in Fortnite Season 4. We're going to be talking about the advantages and the disadvantages for both of the inputs. And then finally, I'm going to tell you guys which one I think is better. And it's really more of a complicated answer, you'll just have to wait and see. But before we get into that, 13% of you guys aren't subscribed, and I know that's not a lot, but if y'all could sub, that would mean a lot. Compared to last time, like, the amount that's not subscribed has just decreased like so much, so thank you guys so much for the support. But without further ado, let's get into the video. Alright, so here is the little thing I made just because I want to explain something real quick. So y'all probably can't tell, this says controller. I tried my best. This is keyboard and mouse, you can probably understand that. So this is the skill gap. So let's start off with the skill gap for keyboard and mouse. So this is the lowest skill point you can go. This is the highest skill point you can go, right? So you can be the worst player in the world on keyboard and mouse, or you can be the best player in the world, right? On controller, on the other hand, you can't be that bad just because it's a lot easier to hit shots, and because hitting shots is basically, without a question, the most important part of this game or any game in general. So I would put the lower skill cap like just a lot higher than the keyboard and mouse one, but to sacrifice for that, I would say that controller players can't get as good as keyboard and mouse players when it comes to this. And I know you probably think you just got your answer, but you didn't. Not quite yet. So now that we have that out of the way, let's talk about the advantages and disadvantages of controller. So the first and the main thing that controller has an advantage on is aiming, which is again arguable, but the aim assist is just pretty insane from close range, hip fire, you know, anywhere. And I get it, they need that, but that really just makes it a lot easier for controller players to compete against other players. So secondly, we have 360 movement, and that's really important, especially with like the new box fighting meta, like the box like a fish meta. The 360 movement makes it a lot easier to move awkwardly, to get out of boxes, maybe before you get boxed or while you get boxed. You can avoid shots a lot easier. Another thing is that you can look forever without having to reposition your hand. And what I mean by that is when your mouse gets close to the edge of your mouse pad, you have to reposition it to the center just so you have more movement. And for the last thing, but probably the most important, you have a lot of customization when it comes to your sensitivities. What I mean by that is you have a different edit mode, build mode, normal sensitivity. You have two different like linear and exponential. It's just a lot that you have. And compared to keyboard or mouse, where you're only really available to one sensitivity, I think you're put at a pretty big advantage on controller when it comes to customization. But now, let's get into the disadvantages. So one of the main disadvantages on controller is you have to toggle your builds. And what I mean by that is it's not like keyboard and mouse where you can have your wall binded as F. You could be on your pickaxe and just press F to pull out your wall immediately. You'll have to press two different buttons just to pull out your wall. And that kind of falls into the next disadvantage, which I think it is harder to get mechanically better on controller. Let's be real, you will very, very rarely ever find a controller player that can edit as fast as LD, is mechanically consistent as faze sway, or is as good in the pro scene as scoped. So for the last disadvantage I have, it might be a little confusing, but I have this as how smart the controller player is when it comes to competitive play. Okay, before you roast me in the comment section, let's think of a good 3 or 4 professional controller IGLs. Alright, look, I just gave you a few seconds, and I'm gonna guess not one popped into your mind. And that's because, without a doubt, keyboard and mouse players are just smarter when it comes to this sort of stuff. You see the smartest players in the world, like Zate, Bizzle, and Creo, they're all on keyboard and mouse. Even when you watch controller players play tournaments, they specifically, most of the time, they specifically rely on eliminations early and mid game. And my proof to back that up is in FNCS, which is a really placement heavy tournament. There are no controller players found within any of the weeks. Like maybe a few controller players that are found within a few weeks that are in top 10. And people will try to tell you it's because controller players are mechanically at a disadvantage. But at the end of the day, they're not. They're not at a mechanical disadvantage. It's the rotations they make. It's how they rotate to zone. It's how they get third-partied. Watch a controller player play and you will realize the only way that they're going to win a game is if they can get quick eliminations early in mid-game without getting third-partied. Normally, the only reason that they'll die is because they'll make a dumb decision doing something that sacrifices their game. The last thing I'm going to say about this is just imagine somebody with the brain of FaZe Bizzle that had the mechanics of FaZe Sway on controller. So now enough of that, let's hop into the keyboard advantages. So for the first thing I have being able to be mechanically better. You're going to be able to edit and build a lot faster on a keyboard or mouse. Okay, so for another advantage I have, just say somebody is right behind you taking your wall. It's going to be a lot easier to instantly turn around if you have a mouse because you can like whip your mouse to the other side of your mouse pad, you know? But on controller, it's just one constant speed that you're sticking with. And just for the last advantage, it's scroll wheel reset. Everybody knows it just instantly resets your walls. Nothing really to say other than that. It's pretty big, but yeah. So for the disadvantages of controller, the first one and the main one that's so annoying is 360 movement. And I know what you guys are thinking. You can move 4 directions, that's all you need, right? Normally, if you play normally on a keyboard or mouse, you have to take your finger off D, off A, off S, actually not off S, but you have to take your finger off your movement binds to place builds normally. And that's why it's a lot harder to be fluent and just be able to side jump and that sort of stuff on keyboard or mouse. For the last one is kind of my opinion. It's in my opinion, it's a lot harder to aim on keyboard or mouse just because you don't have aim assist. Like I just played on controller for maybe 2 hours. I've hit more one pumps than I've ever hit on keyboard or mouse. And that's not because I'm worse or better on either of the inputs. It's because controller is just a lot easier to hit higher damage shots on. So now let's get into really like kind of breaking it down to what I think is better. So I did this in like a certain way to where I'll basically be measuring the skill gaps and I'll be telling you what is better for what skill gap. So for this, I have bad, below average, average, above average, semi-pro, and pro. So how this is gonna work is, say I put a below average controller player against a below average keyboard or mouse player, what would happen? That's how I'm gonna be comparing this. So let's start off with bad. So I mean, like, say we put 2 people together that have never played the game in their life. The controller player would obviously win because that is aim assist. It's gonna hit every single shot they take. You know, they're gonna win the fight. So now for below average, somebody who's not very good at all, the player that you normally clap in every single game. Below average, I would still give it to controller just because they're more of a threat, because they can beam you just like randomly beam you. It just happens. So average is just like the person that plays for like maybe 2 hours every day, or maybe skip some days, doesn't play at all. But again, I'd give it to controller just because they're more of a threat when it comes to aiming, and you're not going to be able to, and if you're just an average player, you're not going to be able to build around that. You're going to get beamed, and then they're probably going to exploit in their box. The controller player is probably going to exploit into the box and then kill you. Either way. So now we have above average, a person who plays the game every day. I would probably say I fall in here. I actually don't play the game every day, but I would still say I fall into above average. So just imagine me on keyboard and mouse against above average me on controller. Controller would probably win the fight because an above average player most likely isn't going to hit all their shots. I don't hit every single shot I take, but my controller me does. I will hit every shot. So the only way that I would possibly win on keyboard and mouse is to outplay myself. So I would have to like go around, like I'd have to out piece control myself. I'd have to do all that. Instead, I could get on a controller, I could jump in their box, not even have to use my shotgun and kill them. So now getting into semi-pro players. So a semi-pro player is somebody who has under $20,000 in earnings. He plays the game competitively. He's just not the best at it, but he's still insanely skilled at it. Now this is where I think keyboard and mouse and controller players are about even. And the only reason I say this, keyboard and mouse would be on top, but the only reason is because linear is in the game, and linear allows controller players to have exact movements, which allows them to be mechanically better. It raised the skill cap from their mechanics. But the main thing that I think separates the controller pro players from the keyboard and mouse pro players is piece control. And I know what you're saying, there are really good controller players that have really good piece control, like Reed. Just a lot of good controller players have really good piece control, but they're professional players, right? But normally keyboard and mouse players will rise on top when it comes to piece control. But the only reason I didn't give the slight edge to keyboard and mouse here is because, well, one because of linear, and the other because controller players are still kind of consistently hitting more shots at this level. So next we got the professional players, and what I mean by this is the top of the top, the Bizzles, the Bughas, the Glixes, just all of them. And this is where I will give the fat ass edge to keyboard and mouse. And the reason I give such a huge edge to keyboard and mouse is because they've mastered all the things controller players can do. They have just as good as aim as them, or better. They have better piece control. They have better mechanics. They've mastered movement to a point where it's so fluent that it's almost like almost like they're playing on 360 movement. And most importantly, it doesn't really have to do with this at a disadvantage with their input, but keyboard and mouse players are generally smarter than controller players. So after doing this whole video, doing research, watching other videos on this topic, I personally came to a conclusion that controller is at an advantage when it comes to bad players, to above average players. But when you get to those higher levels, I think keyboard and mouse definitely rises above. But if somebody wants to switch inputs, I personally would not recommend switching inputs anymore. It's not worth it. People have gotten too good. It's going to take too long for you to get good. And by the time you get good, you're going to be below the skill level of everybody you know. So, I know a lot of people disagree with me. So I want you to go down to the comment section and tell me what you think, what I thought was wrong to you. You know, just that general sort of stuff. But, as always, feel free to drop a like and subscribe. It really makes my day. We have grown an insane amount over the past week and a half. We had one of my videos blow up, and I think I've gotten maybe, I would say, 80 subscribers over the past week and a half, which is insane. Thank you guys so much for the support. I really appreciate it. Have a good day. I'll see y'all in the next one.